Leadership. All my life, I've been fascinated by what makes a good leader. Are good leaders born or made? Can leadership be taught? How do leaders lead if people don't trust to even listen? I grew up in Arkansas. Now I live and work in the innovation heartland of Northern California. During these last years of constant crisis, I've thought more deeply about what leadership is and what it takes to lead people, especially when trust is in limited supply. That's why I decided to create this podcast and reach out to changemakers from different disciplines to hear what they have to say. As the host of this show, the most important things I can do are two things I learned in medical school: to ask good questions and then listen. Hello, I'm Lloyd Minor, Dean of the Stanford School of Medicine, and welcome back to the Minor Consult. I'm honored to welcome today's guest, Executive Vice President of Strategy at ModeX Therapeutics, Dr. Betsy Nabel. She's a leader with many hats. Her career has spanned the NIH and the NFL. She's excelled as a leader of academic institutions and in pharma and biotech. Among her many roles, Betsy may be best known for serving as the president of Brigham and Women's Hospital for 11 years, focusing on creating a culture centered on innovation and collaboration. A tireless multitasker, Betsy has brought her expertise to the NFL as the Chief Health and Medical Advisor from 2015 to 2017, and has served on a number of boards, including Moderna, Medtronic, the Lasker Foundation, and the Broad Institute. Now, Betsy is focused on developing cutting-edge cancer therapies at her startup, ModeX Therapeutics, which harnesses the power of the immune system to target and attack cancers, and is part of the exciting and rapidly growing field of precision medicine. Betsy, thank you so much for joining me today.
Lloyd, I'm honored to be with you.
Many refer to a career in medicine as a calling. Did you feel this way when you were deciding to go into medicine? And if so, can you describe when you first heard your call and what led you to focus on cardiology?
I truly believe medicine is a calling. It certainly has been for me. I think I was in high school when I first articulated my interest in going into medicine. My father was a scientist, a chemist, who loved scientific discovery and research and would often talk about it at the dinner table at night. So he really shared his passion with me. At the same time, I enjoyed caring for other people. I enjoyed my personal relationships with other people. And I thought medicine was the perfect combination of science, human biology, and really taking care of other people. So that's really how I developed my interest in medicine. How I ended up in cardiology is really an interesting story with a bit of a silver lining. I was a fourth-year medical student at Cornell in New York City, and I was really quite interested in surgery. I enjoy working with my hands. The chief of surgery at Cornell at the time was a gentleman by the name of Dr. G. Tom Shires. He was a Texan. He hailed from Parkland. He and his team took care of JFK on the unfortunate day he was assassinated. And Dr. Shires had fairly traditional views of the role of women in medicine. And he firmly believed that women should not be surgeons. There was no room for women in surgery. So I thought, well, I can push that button, but I'll probably end up a fairly miserable human being. And so I thought of what is sort of the next best field in which I can be active and interventionalist and still take care of people. And so I chose cardiology. I went up to the Brigham and did a fourth-year rotation with Dr. Eugene Braunwald. And at that time, the Brigham was a mecca of American cardiology. And then I was fortunate to match and do my internal medicine and cardiology training there.
That's fantastic. And with your leadership, Betsy, the Brigham continues to be a mecca in cardiology and in so many other fields of medicine, precision health today. We both share a background as physician scientists, a critical role in biomedicine, and many of today's biggest medical breakthroughs can be traced back to physician scientists. Can you share with us your thoughts on being a physician scientist? You also have been involved both through your leadership in the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute and as president of one of the leading academic medical centers in the country. You've been involved in the training of physician scientists. Where do we stand today, and what do we need to be doing to ensure our future?
Well, Lloyd, I'm a firm believer in the role of physician scientists in our society. When I think back on my career, I think I had three major influences that led me in the direction of being a physician scientist. The first was my father, who I said earlier was a scientist. He was an inventor, a creator. And he invented a number of commercial products for 3M and held many patents. And I just so vividly recall seeing the excitement, the joy, the sparkle in his eyes when he talked about his discovery and his work. The second major influence on my life in terms of being a physician scientist was Dr. Eugene Braunwald, who was the chair of medicine at the Brigham for many years. And Gene is a remarkable individual, and if many of your listeners have not had the opportunity, I heartily recommend Tom Lee's book that captures Gene's life from Vienna, Austria, to London, England, to the United States, and all that he's contributed to American medicine. But Gene took Morning Report. We listened to him. He was a role model. He had high standards for us. He expected us to use our talents, and he expected that we would make major contributions to American medicine. So it was really within that glow, that halo, that I was raised in medicine. And then finally, I would say my husband, Gary, we trained together at the Brigham. He's an MD, PhD. He's been very engaged in research. And we've had a wonderful to-fro for the past 38 years. Now, having said all of that as background, when I was the director of the NHLBI and I looked across the American landscape and the funding of grants to individuals and institutions, it became very clear to me that physician scientists and medical research is a jewel in the crown in this country. Members of Congress believe that firmly, and I think the American people want that as well. And so I think it's beholden on us as leaders in American medicine, certainly you at a truly outstanding academic medical center, that we absolutely must maintain this tradition of training physician scientists. Not all of our physician scientists will stay in academic medicine. Many now are going off to do absolutely wonderful things in biotech, in pharma, in government and public policy, in many other fields. But I do believe that physician scientists are the backbone of American medicine.
It's so well stated, and certainly I think a unique attribute of our system, right? And in many places where great scientific research is done internationally, you don't see the same fusion of clinical medicine and really cutting edge science that we've been able to foster here in the United States.
Yes, that's right. And I think it's the ecosystem which is so critical. And certainly it's an important ecosystem that you have at Stanford and in the Bay Area, where clinicians, physician scientists, bioengineers, experts in multiple fields can come together, work together, and innovate and create together. It's such a special environment that we have here in the United States.
When you were in medical school and then residency and then fellowship in cardiology and the scientific career that you embarked upon, did you have your sights set on assuming broader leadership roles, or did you contemplate the amazing trajectory you've had in leadership in American medicine?
Well, that's an interesting question, Lloyd. I think early on in my career, I valued leadership. I loved working for strong leaders who nurtured and supported their students and their faculty. So I think I probably quietly thought about broader leadership roles, but I didn't talk about it at the time. I think what I did is I formed relationships with my mentors or individuals who I thought were role models, who were terrific leaders in one way or the other. And I would often talk with them about their leadership or their leadership qualities or how they viewed leadership. And so I could learn. I really think that's probably was sort of the basis for my growing interest in leadership.
When I moved from being department chair to provost at Hopkins, my wife gave me a wooden box that to this day sits on my desk. And inscribed on it is a quote that's attributed to Lord Chesterfield. And the quote is, "In order to discover new oceans, you need to have the courage to lose sight of the shore." And your leadership has spanned research laboratories, academia, government agencies, industry, and now as an entrepreneur co-leading ModeX Therapeutics. What's been your philosophy as you've navigated your career path, and how do you choose and how have you chosen what you do next?
Terrific question, Lloyd. I've been fortunate that I've just always had a very deep passion for science and medicine. And that's what has driven me to get up every morning and go about and doing the work that I love doing. I don't think I've ever had a day where I said, oh, gee, I wish I'd gone into law or business or politics. I just am truly passionate about science and medicine. So that has really been my enthusiasm, has really been sort of my guide. But having said that, as I've thought about my career pathway and how to make choices, I began as a physician scientist at the University of Michigan. Gary and I had our first academic roles there. I began as an interventional cardiologist and then developed an NIH-funded lab looking at principles of vascular biology, molecular and cellular aspects of vascular biology. I was fortunate to be asked to take on several leadership roles there, including directing the Cardiovascular Research Center and then being the division chief for cardiology. I enjoyed those roles very much. But then Gary had an opportunity to move to the NIH to be the founding director of the Vaccine Research Center. And that was a terrific opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, for Gary and for our family as well. As I thought about my next steps, quite honestly, I was very happy at Michigan, loved our cardiology division. But I chose to look at the world a little bit more broadly and say, gee, I've never thought I would be a government employee. I never thought I'd work at the NIH, but that might be kind of interesting. And how can I use that as an opportunity to learn more about science, to learn more about medicine, and particularly learn about public policy? And so I joined the NHLBI initially as the scientific director for intramural research, and then eventually as the director. And that turned out to be a role that I enjoyed tremendously. The opportunity to interface with leaders in our country in all dimensions was really extraordinarily special. So I think as a result of that, Lloyd, I've really thought about my career in almost 10-year stints from physician scientist to NHLBI to back to leader of academic medicine and now in biotech. But I think that being open to new opportunities and heading in different directions provides a real richness to one's career.
Absolutely. So while at the NIH, Betsy, you achieved so much, but perhaps most visible to the general public is the Red Dress Heart Truth campaign, which was the first federally sponsored national health educational program. Can you share more about this campaign and in particular what made it so groundbreaking and the challenges you faced as you planned the campaign and assessed its impact?
That's a very interesting story. In the early 2000s, there were a group of women came to the NHLBI. These were women who were from the Bethesda, Maryland area. They were in their 50s, and several of them had recently had a heart attack and had survived. And they came to the Institute and they said, we don't understand why we have heart disease. We thought heart disease was a man's disease. You need to embrace this and educate women in this country about the importance of heart disease in women. Women need to understand their risks. The director of the NHLBI at the time was Dr. Claude L'Enfant, and he brought a group of us together, women, cardiologists, together within the Institute, and said, shall we put together a program to educate women about their risk for heart disease? And we said, absolutely yes. So we got the Heart Truth program going. Shortly thereafter, Dr. L'Enfant retired and I became director, and I put the program on steroids. The first thing we did was to bring in Ogilvy, which was our marketing firm, and we asked them to put a campaign together for us. Now, you wouldn't normally think that an NIH institute would bring in Ogilvy as a marketing firm, but I had a very creative communications team, and that's what we did. So how did the red dress come about? There was a woman on the Ogilvy team who lived in New York. Her mother was dying of heart failure, and she was visiting her mother one day in her apartment, and she was thinking, what is a symbol of heart disease? What is a symbol that all women can identify and relate to? And she was looking in her mother's closet and she saw a red dress. And she said, that's it. Every woman can relate to a red dress. It's hopeful, it's energetic, it's forward thinking. And so the red dress became the iconic symbol. The next step that happened is that we invited First Lady Laura Bush to be our ambassador. And she accepted. Women's health issues, and particularly the red dress, was one of her causes in addition to education. And she embraced the campaign and amplified its messages tremendously. We did a number of speaking tours and engagements together. I think she enjoyed the work, and she had a tremendous impact. The last feature is also something that you would not normally think a federal agency would do. And that is that Ogilvy and our communication team embraced the entertainment and the fashion industry and asked various components of those industries to amplify our message. So the red dress, as you know, has been written up in every women's fashion magazine, Ladies' Home Journal, McCall's, etc. And in addition, the Ogilvy arranged for there to be a red dress fashion show every year in February, which is Heart Month, on the Friday before Fashion Week. And Fashion on 5 in New York arranged for American designers each year to design a red dress, which was then worn by various women celebrities, whether they be in entertainment, sports, journalism, or whatever. And Mrs. Bush was the MC each year of the red dress fashion show. And so that was an iconic event each year that went on for 5 or 6 years. A lot of publicity, a lot of media, but really amplified the message tremendously. So what did I learn from all of that? That you can use the role that you're in, your position, as a platform to really advocate for health messages that are going to be impactful for people across this country. That the Heart Truth campaign goes on today. The American Heart Association, the American Cardiology, College of Cardiology have continued it. But it was a powerful campaign, and importantly, it educated women about their risk of heart disease.
And it continues to have enormous impact. It was such a visionary program to launch, Betsy, and the way you developed it. And have you seen follow-on activities at the NIH or other government agencies learning from the successes of the Heart Truth program? Are there now more public-facing activities in other areas of the NIH, for example, around disease groups or particular conditions?
Yeah. Yes, there are. Following the Heart Truth, several of the institutes came together and formed a program around childhood obesity. And that served as the foundation for First Lady Michelle Obama's movement around let's move, childhood obesity and physical health. In addition, there have been a number of public-facing cancer campaigns as well, several that have been done around breast cancer in collaboration with Susan Comane and others. No, so it's really been a wonderful model for other very successful programs.
That's great. I think you and I both believe that this century will be defined by the life sciences. There are so many breathtaking leaps happening right now. It's almost hard to fathom the progress that we could see over the next few decades in eradicating disease and improving human health. What makes you most excited about the future? And perhaps also you could talk about the work that's going on at ModeX Therapeutics and how that fits into your vision for this future of the life sciences and a transformational impact we believe it can have.
Yeah, I'm extraordinarily excited around the life sciences. We spoke earlier about precision medicine, and that's really being empowered by the application of molecular biology and genetics. You and I trained in the early years of molecular biology and genetics when the scientific principles were first being developed. For a number of years earlier in my career, I worked on a number of techniques, both basic science and applied, around cardiovascular gene therapy. Our techniques were crude in those days, but we've made advances and the science has moved forward. What I'm so excited about now is we are at the point where we can apply gene editing, CRISPR technology, cell and genetic therapies to human diseases. The number of therapies that are now being developed within academia and within biotech is just breathless. And I think for many of us who grew up in this era of American medicine, it's just so enormously exciting. Walter Isaacson's book, The Codebreaker, I think captures the story so extremely well, and I would recommend it for any of the listeners who have not had a chance to listen to it yet. So fast forward to ModeX Therapeutics. ModeX Therapeutics was founded by Dr. Elias Sahuni, former director of the NIH, and my husband, Dr. Gary Nabel, former chief scientific officer at Sanofi. Dr. Sahuni was also head of global R&D at Sanofi. And they had developed a number of techniques around multispecific antibody targeting. It's really a platform technology. That technology now has been spun out of Sanofi and has been built upon, added upon, to develop a number of approaches towards viral diseases and cancer, particularly immunotherapies for cancer. I left the Brigham after 11 years, a great run, but wanted to now move into biotech, and I joined them about a year ago. And we're working very, very hard to develop a very sophisticated platform technology around multispecific antibody targeting. The first applications, as I said, will be viral diseases and immunotherapy for cancers, but undoubtedly there will be other applications as well.
It's fantastic. Well, we look forward to following the amazing trajectory and progress in the company, and so much exciting work to be done. Maybe now we move to a topic I know that is on both of our minds a lot these days, and that is trust of science, trust of medicine in our society. A recent Gallup survey before the pandemic showed that people rated nurses and doctors as the most trustworthy and ethical professions, ahead of teachers, clergy, and journalists, to name a few. With how COVID-19 has laid bare the massive science skepticism that exists in our country, it seems that many trust their own doctors and nurses, but not the scientific community at large. In your career, have you noticed a change in how people view scientists and medical professionals? And what do you think has driven this change?
I agree with you, Lloyd, that individuals still want to trust their doctor, their nurse, their healthcare provider. That personal relationship is so incredibly important to individuals and families particularly during times of a very serious illness. And I think it's important for us not to lose sight of the importance of the doctor-patient relationship, or the nurse-patient relationship. So that's at a personal level. But I think at a societal level, we've all seen, unfortunately, how medicine and healthcare has become politicized. And I think we've seen this trend growing, certainly over the past 10, 15, maybe 20 years. I think after the recession in the late 2000s, we began to see a number of Americans who were disenfranchised, perhaps because of socioeconomic factors, perhaps because of racial tensions, or other factors. And then when we added in Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, in the early 2010s, I think that message allowed a number of disenfranchised Americans to say, the government's trying to do something to me. The government's trying to make me do something. Now, let me just step aside a minute because I'm strongly supportive of the Affordable Care Act. I think it's been very good for many, many Americans. But what I'm really addressing here is how it became politicized. And along with a number of other components of our society, led to a real division. And that division has only grown, as we've seen in our national politics, over the past 4 to 6 years. Extremely, extremely unfortunate. And then we had COVID on top of it. I think under normal circumstances, if we were back in the Walter Cronkite era, and Walter Cronkite came on television at night and delivered the messages about COVID, wear a mask, keep your distance, get vaccinated, take care of one another, Americans would have fallen into line. But now we've got such divisions of Fox versus CNN that most Americans don't know where to turn now for medical information and get most of their medical information off the internet. It's just unfortunate and very, very tragic. So how do we get through this as a society? I agree with you wholeheartedly that we have to restore trust in our institutions. And I think that we begin to do that first at the personal level by supporting our doctors, our nurses, our healthcare providers to really emphasize the importance of trust in their relationship with their patients. And then we build trust in our institutions. As a leader of an academic medical center, I'm sure you see how important it is for you to build trust in your institution. I certainly saw it at the Brigham. And we scale from there. I think our federal government institutions have to be seen as sources of trust as well. Our CDC, our FDA, our NIH. There's a lot of rebuilding we need to do.
Those observations, Betsy, are so astute and so meaningful to me, and I know to our listeners as well. And, you know, as you look at how we as scientists, as physicians, communicate uncertainty, I mean, it strikes me that one of the challenges with COVID is this virus has continued to throw us, you know, curveballs, and who knows what the next variant's going to be, and even early on, knowing the mode of transmission, it was difficult to get the science we needed as quickly as we needed it. And one of the things that struck me is how we communicate uncertainty as scientists when we legitimately have uncertainty. And are there lessons we can take away from the early days of the pandemic and communications coming from federal agencies and others about how maybe in the future we're more effective communicators of uncertainty and the need to update criteria and requirements and recommendations as we gather more knowledge?
I think you're exactly right, Lloyd. As leaders in American medicine, we are communicators, and it's important that we take that role seriously. We need to communicate within our organizations, within our communities, at the local level, the state level, and the national level as well. And you and I know that American medicine is filled with uncertainty, as you've just stated. But it's important for us to be transparent about that, to state clearly what we know and what we don't know. and what we anticipate will be changing over time to help prepare individuals. I'm sure you've had similar experiences to me where when you are in your community and you're visiting with colleagues who are not in medicine, they ask you, they don't understand the uncertainty. Somehow, we Americans have come to be secure in medicine so that people want definitive answers, and we know that that's not always the case. So yes, we must be articulate. We must communicate what we know and what we don't know and what those uncertainties will be. I think that may be one of the most important lessons that we've learned from our COVID experience.
I agree. I absolutely agree. Now, we're hopeful, of course, that we may be nearing an endemic phase for COVID-19. I'm wondering, from both a science and communication standpoint, Betsy, what are the challenges we face as we move into this stage of the pandemic, and how can we make sure that we improve our communication methods and messages as we navigate the next phase of the pandemic?
Well, I think about moving forward in a couple different phases. I think there's there's the actual virus and what is it going to do and how will we respond. And I think it's now become very clear that the SARS-CoV-2 will continue to mutate. There will be more variants, but we will be better prepared to deal with them. First of all, many of us have been vaccinated, many have had COVID, so herd immunity is clearly present. But importantly, we also now are well positioned to develop new RNA vaccines against the new variants. That work is going forward by multiple companies. And undoubtedly, the COVID vaccine will be combined with the flu vaccine on a yearly basis. And it could be that every fall, when we get our flu vaccine, that flu vaccine will be a combination of influenza plus COVID and maybe RSV or some other respiratory virus. That's moving forward. To me, that scientifically seems relatively straightforward. What I'm most concerned about are the psychological, emotional, mental, behavioral impacts of what we've just been through over the past 2 years. None of us have ever experienced this in our lifetime. And we didn't know, we couldn't predict, we didn't know what was going to be next. And I think our healthcare workers and our educators have suffered the biggest tolls. I certainly saw at the Brigham, and I'm sure you've seen at Stanford, the burnout, the anxiety, the depression, the PTSD of our healthcare providers is absolutely remarkable. It's really as if they had been at war. They put their personal needs and their families aside and cared for patients day in and day out. They've been our heroes, our heroines. They have sacrificed their own lives for the lives of their patients. And now coming out of it, we're looking back and saying, oh my goodness, we never anticipated we would be going through this. And so I care very, very deeply about the emotional, psychological, and behavioral health, certainly of my colleagues at the Brigham, at Mass General Brigham, but colleagues across the country who have gone through so much. It's going to take time. I think as leaders of American institutions, we need to devote the resources and the care models and the attention that we need to help our healthcare providers get better. It will take time, it'll be slow, but we need to show them that we care and we're concerned, not only for their own personal safety, their family's safety, but also we will lose so many individuals in the healthcare profession. So that's what I really am focused on now as we think about the post-COVID recovery.
That's so well stated, and I've often been asked over these past 2 years, how I'm doing or how I stay resilient. And what is continuously inspiring to me is the dedication and commitment, as you just mentioned, of our healthcare workforce, of all the way through the workforce, from the doctors, the nurses, also the people, the food service workers, the custodians, It's been incredible to see that sustained sense of dedication and commitment, even with all the vicissitudes and uncertainties that we've encountered. And I agree that we're only beginning to fathom the psychological effects of the amount of personal, sort of deferred personal maintenance, and in many cases neglect of personal needs and opportunities in order to serve the public during these really challenging times. And I hope that maybe that will be something that will help us, to the topic we're just talking about, help us rebuild the trust that our profession should have and has enjoyed in the past, is the realization of the broader public that the healthcare workforce in America has been here for everyone and will continue to be here for you as well. That's certainly a message that we're trying to get out, and as well as looking at how we support our people currently and for what we know is going to be a very prolonged recovery time.
Yes. I couldn't agree with you more.
Maybe we turn to a topic of leadership overall. And while at Brigham and Women's, you prioritized innovation and collaboration. And could you tell us how a leader can cultivate this type of environment in an organization? There are many things you can point to during your 11 years as president of Brigham and Women's that you brought to the institution that is now inculcated in the DNA of the institution. But how did you go about doing it? What were some of the challenges? And how do we measure and quantify when we are becoming more innovative and collaborative?
It's a very important question. And I think, as we've talked about earlier in the podcast, I think we both agree that it's really important for there to be academic medical centers, research institutions in this country to really train the next generation of physician scientists. When I came back to the Brigham after leaving the NIH, I saw the power of federal funding for medical research and what it could do. And I knew how dedicated the Brigham had been to academic medicine, particularly under Dr. Braunwald's leadership. And many of those traditions continued. And so there already was fertile ground with many, many talented faculty and students who had self-selected to be at the Brigham because they wanted to be physician scientists, they wanted to be innovators, they wanted to be creators. So it was very easy for me in that setting to simply be their champion, to really be their voice, and to really communicate and articulate at every step along the way that innovation, scientific discovery, creativity is simply part of our DNA. And what I found so exciting is that message was really a catalyst, not only for the people engaged in research, but for all of our other colleagues who embraced research and were at the Brigham because they wanted to be at a research institution. They may be a provider, a nurse, a technician caring for a patient, but they wanted to be engaged in clinical trials. They wanted to be engaged in the newest techniques. They wanted to be engaged in cutting edge technologies. And so as a leader, it was relatively easy and straightforward for me to do. But having said that, nonetheless, I worked hard at it and made sure we had a communication team that was focused on this, and we reiterated the messages in any way that we could. And we also then supported the innovation and scientific discoveries activity. First of all, we had a robust scientific advisory board. We had the Brigham Research Institute, the Brigham Education Institute put a lot of dollars towards those. We had all sorts of grant programs for students, for postdocs, for junior faculty, bridging grants to help individuals get their career started. We facilitated helping individuals start their academic laboratories and research wherever we could. And importantly, it was a message that I articulated to my Brigham board of directors every time we met, and made sure that I had our scientists, our clinicians presenting at board meetings to really talk about the exciting work that was being done. And then finally, I'd say when I had the opportunity to recruit new department chairs, I looked for individuals who were physician scientists and who would be those leaders within the organization. You know, when you talk about quantifying and metrics to see how you're doing, there are a lot of the standard metrics that you can use: number of publications, citation factors, the number of grants, but you can also look at how people vote with their feet. When you have a research day, who shows up? Who presents? Who wants to be there? We ended up opening up our research day to our patient population, and it was remarkable the number of people from the community and our patients who would want to come and hear and just sit in the lecture hall and listen to all of the exciting advances. That perhaps you can quantify, but then there's the quality as well. When you see people enthusiastic, excited, eager to engage in their work, I think that's also a wonderful measure of how well we're doing as an institution.
Absolutely. Betsy, you've been a leader of organizations with very different cultures, leader of a large NIH institute, the NHLBI, and then leader of an extraordinarily prestigious academic hospital, academic medical center, Brigham and Women's. What approaches did you use to learn new cultures, and to maybe, could you talk about how you maybe had to adapt your leadership style relative to those different cultures, and anything that you can teach our audience about that and your leadership journey?
A leader evolves over time to integrate new knowledge and new experiences into their leadership style. A leader matures over time. I think there are two factors that I have long thought about in terms of leadership. One I'll call the local factor, and the other is the more generalizable factor. The local factor is whenever you go to a new institution, there are going to be local cultures, local traditions, local way of doing things. And it's very important for a new leader to step back and listen and learn. Do a listening tour. Pay attention. Talk to all different types of constituents. What's important to patients, to students, to faculty, to donors, to a board. Listen. What's important to them? What can you glean from them? How can you bring them under the tent with you? That's critically important. And I can assure you there are vast differences between an academic medical center and a federal government agency. Important lessons that I learned there. But then I think on a more general level, there are traits that a leader has that I think transcends the local culture. A leader needs to motivate and inspire. A leader needs to listen and to be respectful of all members of the community, whether it be, again, patients or students or faculty or board members or colleagues, members of the local community. Respect is enormously important. A leader needs to be the true north for an institution and articulate the set of values that are important for that institution. Individuals want to look to their leader and see themselves in that leader and be inspired by them. And when you think about being the true north, I've often thought, it's a pretty straightforward set of values. It's about respect, it's about dignity, it's about integrity, it's about elevating everyone around you, it's about supporting others so they can be the best versions of themselves. Easy to articulate, but much tougher to do. But I think that that's the wonderful work of being a leader, when you can see how you can help raise up others around you and help them be the best versions of themselves. That's really what brought me great satisfaction as a leader.
That's so inspiring and so well stated. In closing, Betsy, we're heading into year 3 of this pandemic. What gives you optimism about the future?
Yeah. When I think about the future, I am an optimist. I think about what Maya Angelou taught us. Remember when she said, people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did. But people will never forget how you made them feel. And when you think about that, as leaders, we have an opportunity to really focus on relationships. For me, at the end of the day, it's all about relationships. It's about how your relationship with another individual, how do you make them feel? And so I'm a tremendous optimist. I truly believe in the power of the human spirit to face adversity, to be resilient, and to move forward for the greater good.
That's fantastic. Well, Betsy, thank you so much for joining today, and thank you for listening to the Minor Consult with me, Stanford School of Medicine Dean Lloyd Minor. I hope you enjoyed today's insightful discussion with Executive Vice President of Strategy at ModeX Therapeutics, Dr. Betsy Nabel. Please check out my conversations with other groundbreaking and brilliant guests as we continue to look at leadership during a once-in-a-generation crisis. Please send your questions by email to theminorconsult@theminorconsult.com and check out our website, theminorconsult.com, for updates, episodes, and more. To get the latest episodes of The Minor Consult, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please rate the podcast 5 stars. Your feedback helps make this podcast happen. Thank you so much for joining me today. I look forward to our next episode. Until then, stay safe, stay well, and be kind.